Have you ever really thought about it? I mean, the shirt on your back is probably from Vietnam, the phone in your hand is from South Korea, and the coffee you're drinking could be from Colombia. Global trade is so deeply stitched into our daily lives, we barely even see it. But why? Why does it happen at all? Why don't countries just, make everything themselves? Let's get into it. Just think about a giant store like Walmart. Part of their whole deal is low prices, right? Well, the only way they can do that is by finding inexpensive stuff from places like China where it's cheaper to make. It's these massive global companies that have basically supercharged world exports, weaving this incredibly complex web that connects all of us. So what you're seeing here isn't just a store, it's really a final stop on a massive global journey. So yeah, that brings us right back to the big question. On the surface, it seems way simpler to just make everything you need right at home, doesn't it? Well, for hundreds of years, some of the world's smartest thinkers have been wrestling with that exact question, trying to explain why trading isn't just a nice to have, but an absolute game changer. To really get the answer, we've got to jump in a time machine and go way back. The very first big idea that tried to explain all this was a theory called mercantilism. So, for about 300 years, from the 1500s to the late 1700s, this was the main way countries thought about trade. The goal was super simple. Get as much gold as you possibly can. And how do you do that? You export everything you can, and you import as little as possible. Trade wasn't about cooperation or teamwork. It was all about building up your own national treasure chest. Mercantilism had a really long run, but as you can see here on this timeline, it was just the opening act in a much, much longer conversation. Every new theory that came along would either build on what came before, or in some cases, completely flip it on its head. The heart and soul of mercantilism was the idea that trade is a zero-sum game. Think of the world's wealth as one single pizza, a fixed-size pizza. If one country gets a bigger slice, that means another country has to get a smaller one. Your gain was, by definition, their loss. End of story. But then, everything changed. In the late 18th century, a completely new way of thinking popped up, and it totally shattered that old idea. This new way of thinking saw trade not as a zero-sum game, but as a positive-sum game. Instead of just fighting over a fixed-sized pizza, this radical idea suggested that trade could actually make the whole pizza bigger. The idea was that through trade, both countries could walk away better off. Everyone could win. And the genius behind this revolutionary idea was the Scottish economist Adam Smith. In 1776, he introduced this theory of absolute advantage. And honestly, the concept is beautifully simple. He argued that a country shouldn't try to be a jack of all trades. Instead, it should just specialize in making the things it's the absolute best at producing, and then trade for everything else. Okay, so check this out. This chart makes the logic crystal clear. Look at Riceland. They're rock stars at making rice. It only takes them 1 unit of work, but they're pretty terrible at making tea. Now look at Tealand. You guessed it. They're the complete opposite. They have an absolute advantage in tea. So, what's the smart move here? And boom, here's the magic. This is the payoff. By specializing, Riceland just makes rice, Tealand just makes tea, and then trading, both of them can have more rice and more tea than they could ever produce on their own. This isn't a trick. The gains from trade are totally real. It is a genuine win-win. Okay, but this brings up a really thorny question, doesn't it? What happens if one country is just better at making both things? I mean, if a nation has an absolute advantage in everything, why in the world would it bother to trade with a country that's less efficient? This is the exact puzzle that another brilliant economist, David Ricardo, solved back in 1817 with his theory of comparative advantage. And his insight was pure genius. He showed that even if a country is less efficient at producing everything, it still makes sense to trade. The key isn't being the best in the world. It's about specializing in what you're least bad at. This analogy just nails it. Think about a brilliant CEO. She probably has an absolute advantage in both running her company and installing a hot tub. She's just good at everything. But her time is worth thousands of dollars an hour leading her company. It makes absolutely no economic sense for her to spend a day installing a hot tub just to save a few $100. She's far better off focusing on what she does best and just paying the installer. That right there is opportunity cost. And it's the secret sauce that makes comparative advantage work. All right, let's keep going. So those two big ideas, absolute and comparative advantage, they really formed the foundation of trade theory for a long, long time. But let's be honest, the modern global economy is way more complicated than Riceland and Tealand, so later thinkers started adding more layers to the cake. People started asking deeper questions, like why is a country good at making something in the first place? Is it really just about how efficient their workers are? Or is there something else going on under the hood? So, the factor proportions theory came along and said the answer is pretty simple. It's all about what you've got, your resources, what economists call factors of production, things like your land, your labor, your capital. The theory predicts that countries will export goods that use a ton of the resources they have a ton of. So if your country has lots of cheap labor, you'll export clothes. If you have lots of forests, you'll export lumber. Makes sense, right? Okay, but what about the product itself? Does its journey from being a brand new, cutting-edge invention to just a regular everyday item change where it gets made? You bet it does. According to the International Product Life Cycle Theory, it suggests a new product, say a smartphone, is usually invented and first produced in a wealthy country. But then, as it gets more common and standardized, production moves to lower-cost countries to save money. And here's the wild part. Eventually, the country that invented the product might actually end up importing it from somewhere else. So far, a lot of these theories kind of assume everyone's starting on a level playing field. But we all know in the real world, in some industries like making jumbo jets or designing software, it seems like whoever gets there first holds all the cards. So what if being the first one to the party is the real key to winning? And that's exactly what new trade theory is all about. It says that for some products, the more you make, the cheaper it is to make each one. That's a powerful idea called economies of scale. This means the first company that can scale up its production can drop its costs so low that it becomes almost impossible for anyone else to compete. They've built a massive first-mover advantage. Okay, let's take a quick breath. We've got efficiency, we've got resources, product life cycles, first-mover advantage. It's a lot of moving parts. So how do we put all of this together to really understand why some nations just seem to dominate certain industries? Well, a theorist named Michael Porter developed this fantastic framework called the Diamond of National Advantage. He said that a nation's competitiveness comes down to four interconnected things. First, factor conditions, especially advanced ones like skilled engineers. Second, demand conditions. Basically, having really picky customers at home forces your companies to innovate and get better. Third, having related and supporting industries, a whole cluster of world-class suppliers. And finally, intense firm strategy, structure, and rivalry right there at home. That fierce domestic competition forges companies that are tough enough to take on the world. Wow, so we've gone on quite a journey, huh? From the simple idea of just hoarding gold to the win-win logic of specialization, all the way to this complex diamond model for modern competition. Our ideas about trade have evolved so much, but the world keeps changing faster than ever. Which leaves us with one final big question to think about. In a world being totally reshaped by AI and instant communication, what do you think the next great theory of trade is going to look like?